All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. So hopefully you got a copy of your prayer list. They said there were some extra forms out there, so you do see out in the foyer, just in case you weren't here last week. We did have our business session last week, so if you wanted to catch up on that, it's out there in the foyer. Also, the notes from Sunday night. I think I did not get a head count, so maybe somebody did, but preacher numbers, right? We always get a bad rap, but I would guess somewhere around 75 people. We had 50 copies made, and we asked people to take one per family, and we just about ran out. So it was a great night, just the introduction night, so looking forward to continuing that study on Sunday nights. But if you weren't here and said, I want to get involved, we do have homework each week, and so that is printed, stapled in the foyer counter there. So we want to draw your attention to those things. Let's go ahead and jump in on our prayer list tonight and see if there are any updates to those on our list or any new additions tonight that we need to make. Okay. All right. You see Kate and Jean on our missions list that they are en route on their way home. They're running into some problems with flights and delays and things of that nature. So be praying for them as they try to get this last leg home. Okay. That's Max Phillips. We'll be praying for the Richardson's family. I don't think they're on our list. I think they rotated off. But we'll get them added back on as they're in Jackson for Bo's reversal surgery. He had some stomach issues when he was born. He had to have a colostomy bag, so I think he's a month old right around now. It's been about a month, and so that surgery was either today or tomorrow, but they expect to be in the hospital for about 4 or 5 days. So be praying for the Richardsons. Mm-hmm. That's the prescription? Like that's what they've told her, or that's just what she's feeling? Yeah. Wow. That's weird. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, we will continue praying. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. 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 That's Jenna. Any others tonight we need to add to our list? Any updates? Is tomorrow? Okay. Yeah. That's what was throwing me off. I knew they were up there already. Okay. Okay. That's the Gavin family. Be praying for them. To the 28th. There's an update on Tate Robertson. Have surgery, heart surgery, 8/28. You said 5th grade? Is that right? Okay. 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 Is that Slater or Clayton? Clayton Allen? Yep. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Well, Slater is cancer free, so he's on our praise side. And so when you started mentioning that, Artie mentioned Clayton this morning, and I remember his was all intestine related. And so when you said reversal, I was like, let me just ask. So yeah, we have added Clayton. If you were here over the last year, he spent quite a few months. I think it was within the last year, maybe the last year and a half. Spent quite a few months on our prayer list. I think it was his senior year at South. Had some issues. Was one of I believe, a band student, and so Artie knew him, and so we've been praying for him for some time too. So we're excited to add him on that praise list as well. Any others tonight? Okay. Any others tonight? All right, do I have any volunteers and be willing to pray for us tonight? Thank you. Chase, anybody else? Thank you, Hank. Do we dare push for 3? Do I have a third? Thank you, Miss Kathy. Anybody else? All right, Chase, why don't you open us, and then Kathy, you close us. Amen. All right. Tonight we're going to continue through our study in the Gospel of Mark, and we'll see how much time we have tonight. This morning at the 10 a.m. It's been going well as well, with just a great spirit and great attendance there. But we're going to do it a little bit out of order tonight, we've not done that much through this gospel, but I simply want to connect Peter's story. And so when we look at we're going to look at his declaration where he says, I will not abandon you, I will not fall away. And I want us to directly connect that to the denial. There's a lot in Mark in between those two, right? There's some 30-some verses, I think, in between those two. And so there's a large section that we're not going to get to tonight. And we will come back to it. So I don't want you to think, oh, we're skipping over something. We're doing some sleight of hand to avoid a difficult passage. But I promise that we'll come in and fill in the blanks. But let's start tonight in verse 22. Mark chapter 14, verse 22. Last week, we looked at them getting to the upper room. And so it's interesting when we look at the Gospels together, especially the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. As we look at those Gospels together and then compare them to John and see how much time John spends in the upper room, even Matthew is going to spend more. But in Mark's account, honestly, we have from verse 17 to verse 25. All right, that's it. That's all of the upper room that we get. And so just compare that to John's gospel. You're going to have chapters upon chapters of the time spent in the upper room. The last things Jesus is teaching, the high priestly prayer, him washing the disciples' feet, the Lord's Supper, the departure of Judas. All those things included in John's gospel, literally chapters. And here in Mark, we get about 8 verses, right, of the upper room. And so we see that Mark has not been super elaborate, right, on the teachings of Jesus, right? It's one of those things that I just keep bouncing my head back and forth of. He's the teacher, right? Emphasized over and over and over in this gospel, yet we don't have as much of his teaching as we do in other of the gospels. And even tonight, just in driving that issue home, spoiler, just looking ahead, what Judas is going to come. He's going to come to Jesus, and then what's he going to call him? Teacher, right? Well, we've seen the term of endearment throughout this book for Christ and his relationship with his disciples, and that's the term Judas is going to use. So don't think of that. Again, I've tried to press that with Bartimaeus. Don't press this as some term of distance, right? Oh, they're not respecting him as Lord. They're just calling him teacher. No, this is absolutely a term of endearment. This is absolutely a reference to I'm submitting to you as my teacher. So, but let's begin so we're in the upper room. Jesus has just introduced the idea of betrayal. And so as we work through this, I just want us to try to engage with what's happening. I want us to try to, and again, I hesitate saying put ourselves in their shoes, because as somebody who lives in 2023, right, it's not always applicable to say my sensibilities in that time, right? If I put myself in their shoes, I'm going to wonder where's the AC, right? And so it's, see what I'm saying? Not necessarily fair to just try to say what we would feel like, but understand he's just introduced this large idea, right? And so I just want us to keep thinking about these things that he's pressing and the anxiety that must have been in that room. Because what he's about to say, so they know, he's been saying for weeks now, I'm heading to Jerusalem, and they're going to kill me. I'm heading to Jerusalem. I'm heading to Jerusalem. They're going to execute me. I'm heading to Jerusalem. But there my life is going to be taken by these men, right? And so he's been prepping them for this. But here, and again, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, at the end of the Lord's Supper, what is he going to say? He said, this is my last time to drink this. Right? And so now we've got a specific timetable. Right? Now we know that either he's going to abstain from the fruit of the vine, he's going to take the Nazirite vow tonight, right? And it's going to be some time, or, man, we're close, right? And so I just want us to feel that tension as we work through this. So let's look at verse 22. While they were eating, so talking about the Passover celebration, he took some bread, after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take it, this is my body." And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." And after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So I wanted to ask, how many of you have been to maybe a little bit different Lord's Supper than what we typically have in the, right? Most of the time, the people who've been overseas, they're like, "Well, I have," right? So you've been something maybe a little bit different. It wasn't necessarily the little square or the little round wafer, right? Anybody had a different experience with the bread? All right, Justin, would you mind sharing what was, and maybe it was the same one that was shared this morning, already shared about Nepal this morning, so maybe that was one in your head, maybe not, but yep. Yep. Right. Okay. Okay, all right, good. All right. Just make that distinction, all right? We can't be passing around pinching off the same loaf if it's post-COVID. What about, would you share about Nepal?
Yeah, well, I felt like an idiot, but yeah. I've never led the Lord's Supper before, and like 2 minutes before the service started, they said, "Hey, Justin, you're leading the Lord's Supper." I was like, "All right, well, how do y'all do it?" "Well, we'll just do it however you do it." Okay. And so I don't even remember what all happened. It was like I blacked out. And I got up there and I read from scripture. I don't even remember what book I probably chose. I don't even know what book I chose. But I read some scripture and we did it, and it was very awkward during every little break.
Right. What about the bread? What about the bread specifically? Do you remember?
Non-leavened bread.
Right.
Tortillas, wasn't it? No, it was.
I wasn't there.
It was flat bread.
Okay. Right. He said that you had to prepare it.
I did. I had to.
Yes, that's what I was trying to draw out of you, right?
I tore every little piece off.
So they brought you like a big pizza, and then you had to be the one to sit there and tear it apart for everybody, right? Now, this is after COVID. All right? So, all right. So what I want us to think about, and again, as we think about sometimes our symbolism, we have two primary, and again, we're in the midst of writing this for our Christianity 101, so it's kind of fresh on the brain. We have baptism and we have the Lord's Supper. And so as we talk about what those things are emblematic of, what they represent for us, one of the things that I do think we miss, because I've been in a service, I was asked or tasked when I was in college, one of our classes, I was at Mississippi College, and we had to go to a worship service that was outside of your, I would say, ethnicity, right? And so there was some options. There was some, like a Korean church, but me and my buddies went to the African American church, right? And they did the Lord's Supper that day, and the men came out white gloves with a loaf of bread wrapped up in a white towel, right? And they passed that around, and and so we didn't know, right? They brought it out, and we're like, I was expecting, when are they cutting this thing up, right? But they passed it around, and you pinched off of it and passed it around. And so in this situation, right, where Justin is up there literally tearing the bread, and then when you're passing the loaf around and you're having to tear it or break it, I think the one thing in our demonstration of the Lord's Supper, we focus so much, I think, on the unleavened, right? It has to be the unleavened cracker. But I think we missed the breaking, right? And this is Jesus, and he says, "This is my body which is broken for you." And most of the time we can tell when we're getting our little wafers, I was like, this was made like this. This was too square, right? This wasn't broken off of anything, right? And so I want us to think about that when it comes to what is the picture here? It's not just the leaven. It's not just, because the unleavened bread, and I'm not going to say it's consequential, but it was what was there for the Passover. Right? It was what was there because they were celebrating the Passover meal. They would have gone through a feast of unleavened bread. They would have had all the leaven taken out of their house. Right? But that simply probably, as you look back at the Jewish tradition, was just because there was a reminder, we're doing this quick. We don't have time for bread to rise. We're going to bake this and we're going to get out of here because the death angel's passing over tonight. So we're going to bake it and we got to get going. And so, because Jesus is going to talk about the leaven is both good and bad, right? Where he's going to say, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. And then later on, he's going to say the kingdom of God is like leaven, right? Put it into a measure of dough, and when it's worked out, it spreads through the whole thing, right? And so it's not necessarily the bread, but I believe really this idea of the taking and the breaking, which Jesus Christ knows that his body is literally about to be broken. And one of the things that just struck me in prepping for this lesson, which again is going to be part that we may not get to tonight. We'll get to it. If we don't get to it tonight, we'll get to it next week, is the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, where we see just these hours and these moments leading up to the cross, and to see the great agony. Just to stop and read it fresh and look at the way it's worded. It says that he went past his disciples and he just fell to the ground. That's the way it's worded, right? It's not that he went and bowed, not that he went and knelt, that he went and fell to the ground in his agony before taking on the cross for us. And so seeing this, as he's giving us this, he said, hey, this is my body, which is broken for you. Take it and eat, right? And then what he does next is to pass the cup. And he passes this cup and says, this is my blood. Each of you take it and drink. And says, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. And so I want us to think, and again, as much as I'm trying, you know me, my love for the Old Testament, and seeing all of these things paralleling the Passover, paralleling this Passover week, even from the selection of the lamb and the timing of his entry into Jerusalem, all of these things falling just in line with the Passover. And yet here, this would have been a radical departure, right, from the Passover. Even the bread, right, even if they're getting this, even if they're understanding, taking the bread and eating it would not have been foreign, because what are they going to do with the Passover lamb? They're going to take the lamb and they're going to eat it, right? The lamb whose blood was put on the doorpost, right? They're going to take it and they're going to eat it. So eating of the sacrifice, or eating of the one who is making this, that's not, but when he says drink my blood, that's a radical departure, because they're not drinking the blood of the sacrifice. The blood was to take it and be put on the doorpost, right? The blood of the animal was to be put on the doorpost so that when it was seen, it would pass over. And I believe this is going to harken back, I believe it's in Jeremiah, where he says there's going to come a time where the law is not going to be external. I'm going to take my law and write it upon their hearts. What Jesus is saying, this is not about putting blood on a doorpost anymore. This is about taking it in. This is about you being covered, you being, and if we wanted to stretch and look at Leviticus 17, where he talks about the power of blood and the reason for the atonement of blood sacrifices, he says it's the life that is in the blood that is significant. And so when Jesus says, take and drink this blood, I believe he's calling his disciples to identify with his life in the same way that baptism identifies us with Christ and his resurrection. The taking of the Lord's Supper identifies us with his death, right? And so we are identifying with his life and his death in this as well. He talks about the new covenant. He says that this is the new covenant which he's bringing to his people. So there's so much significance here in this act of the Lord's Supper. Then they sing, excuse me, they sing a hymn and they leave out for the Mount of Olives. And I'm going to say this probably a couple of times tonight, but we are going to reference a couple of the other Gospels. We've tried very intentionally through this study of the Gospel of Mark to make it a study of the Gospel of Mark. But sometimes the way we do that is to point out, hey, this is what so-and-so said, and for whatever reason, Mark didn't, right? And so sometimes that does help us to understand what his message is by looking at what his message is not, right? And so I do want to say we're trying our best to stay focused here, but just in way of comparison, and again, I don't know why, it's just always this compulsion to give you knowledge, and so you're always ready to give a defense, always ready, and some things we just don't need, I believe, to I don't want to say don't need an answer for, but understand in Matthew and Mark, this next conversation is after they leave the upper room, all right? The conversation he's about to have with Peter and his disciples, and Matthew and Mark happens after they leave. And Luke and John, it happens while they're still in the upper room. Right? So instead of being this outcry of, oh my gosh, here's these great inconsistencies of the Scripture, what we do know and what we do glean from this is that the conversation happened, right? And so if you're, I'm not going to ride my whole faith on whether this happened inside the room or outside the room, right? But understand that as these guys give testimony of what they experienced, and so we're going to see, and I always want to make sure I'm acknowledging and putting those things before you. But look at what it says in verse 27. So Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, because it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." But Peter said to him, "Even though all may fall away, yet I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, this very night, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter kept saying insistently, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they were all saying the same thing also. And so I want us to look at this, and I'm going to try to use my terms clearly. I'm going to talk about this is Peter's declaration, and later we'll see Peter's denial, right? But what Peter is doing, he's getting into an argument, right, with Jesus. And so Jesus makes a statement. So you remember last week when we asked, how would you respond, right? When Jesus drops the bomb in the room and says, "Hey, one of you is going to betray me." Right, so this is new information. They knew he was going to die, right? Well, to some extent, he's been teaching them he was going to die. Whether they fully grasped that or not, it's not clear. But now, for the first time, he introduces, "Hey, it's going to be by one of your hands." And what's the response? You remember? What's that? Right, they were grieved, right? We looked at that in comparison to the indignance that they had earlier. Right, yeah. So what they begin to ask the question, surely not I, right? And it says that goes through each of them. In one of the gospel accounts specifically draws our attention to Judas and said, even Judas says, "Surely not I," right? And so all of them have this question. And so my question here is, what's the difference? What's the difference in the statement? Why is this not? Because we kind of walk through that. It says, why are they asking this question? Is it this faith that I believe in what you say, but surely it won't be by me? I'm sorry. Sometimes I feel like I step into a tin can in certain spots up here, right? Maybe I just need to back up on the stage. So I want us to notice the difference, because now there's no gap. Right? There's no possibility. He doesn't say it's one of you. So just think about it in this room, right? Just think about it. If we were to say, okay, somebody in this room, we might look around. We're going to be skeptical, right? Oh, who is it? Because it's not me. Surely it's not me. We walked through that last week. I'm not going to say who we blamed last week. Right? Wesley. But now there's not this option, there's not this out, because this time he's not one of you, he says all of you, right? So now there's no backing out. Now there's no room to wiggle here. There's no "surely not I," surely it's not going to be me. And so I don't have this defense when Jesus says, "Hey, every one of you is going to scatter. Every one of you is going to take off." And so now Peter knows. Right? Now, this is not a "surely not I." This is you're talking about me. And so Peter, what does Peter do? "No, sir. No, sir. Not me." And so I want us to kind of break this down and look at what's happening here. There's so many different levels to this, right? There's so much going on in these passages. So what is your response? What do you think of when you hear Peter say? Let me ask you guys. What do you think of when you hear Peter say, "Not me, Jesus. Even though all others may fall away, not me"? All right. Right. All right. So we already know. We know what he's going to fail, right? At least marked in this. And again, keep in mind, most believe, it was where we started this study, is that this is Peter's account. That John Mark is simply transcribing Peter's story. And so the fact this is included, I believe it's significant that Peter's willing to say, "Yeah, man, I was the one who said, nope, not me." All right, so we kind of know what he's going to do, so we respond with that knowledge. We scoff and we laugh. What do you think's going on in his head? What is... Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to ask the question appropriately. Okay. Right. So in full sincerity, he makes this claim. Yeah, and he says, I'll even die, right? Again, the second part of that. There's no way. There's no way. He couldn't fathom it, right? Is there, and this is not intended to be a trick question, do you see, I'll put it that way, do you see pride in that statement? If you see pride, where? And that's the multifaceted layers of this I want us to dig into. Okay, good. First, that's what I'm at, because, and again, this is why I've enjoyed, one of the reasons I've really enjoyed studying Mark is because I've never really been a theme person, right? Again, I'm a context person, right? And so, but as we look through this, what have we been talking about these last couple of weeks, right? How many times has it come up that they're arguing about who's the greatest, right? How many times has it come up and so if we hadn't had those conversations, right? If this is just, here it is, it just pops up out of nowhere where Peter says, hey, even if all these, all right? And it's almost like, what is he doing? He's like, all these below me, right? All these other folks, right? If all of them turn, not me. And so if we hadn't had those previous conversations, maybe we wouldn't see the pride, but is there something going on here where when James and John are vying for the seats in glory and everybody's indignant at them and as they're walking along the way and Jesus kind of strolls up and says, hey guys, what you talking about? And they shut down because it says they were talking about which one of them was the greatest, right? So they're having all these conversations, and now Peter steps up when Jesus clearly declares, it's all of you. Now Peter says, not me, even though all others. And so there's this, it seems to be, well, there's this leaking out of his heart where he believes himself, right? I'm agreeing with you that I believe he's sincere. But there's sincerity in believing that he's better, right? There's sincerity in believing that he, yeah, and he doesn't say he says, even if all others fall, I won't. But, so we see pride there. Anywhere else? There, yes, thank you, right? And so understand, when Jesus quotes Scripture, you've got double-barreled God coming at you, right? Right? You've got Jesus saying the words of God, right? God in the flesh speaking, it's Him, He's the Word, so He's citing Himself, right? His own authority. And so Jesus says, hey guys, if He just said all of you, we're going to fall away. That's sufficient. That's God, right? But then when He says, it's written that all of you will fall away, right? So for Peter to stand against that, right? He's got double-barreled words of God coming at him, and he's like, nope, not me. Right? He's like, man, just think of that. And so I told the group this morning, I say, I know sometimes we write in our Bibles, and I'm not a big mantra guy, right? But I think we should all just flip to, I don't know if you have anything written like in the I just want to say, if you ever find yourself in an argument with God, you're wrong. Right? And just go ahead and write that down, right? If you find yourself in an argument with God, you're wrong. And so as we look at this, as Peter is standing against the Holy One, the one he has claimed as the Messiah, the one he says, who else are we going to go to? You have the words of life. And he's following this guy with his life, right? He said, I'm willing to die for you. Why? Because you're Christ, because you're the Messiah, and now I'm not going to believe what you said. So this inconsistency in his life. And so as we see this, to understand all of these things that are going on in this declaration, and in him denying that he would fall away. And so I want to. I thought of it this way. I know some of you, whether you have kids or you've had kids in the past, I was trying to think of a good illustration, but the best I can come up with is if you were at the end, let's just use the end of tonight, you said, hey kids, go get in the car, right? Or, I know it sounds weird, but you're authoritatively saying, hey, we're going to get in the car and we're going to go, right? So you're declaring something that will happen, right? For you to say, we're going to get in the car and go. What would you think if one of your kids just looked at you and you said, right? You declared, hey, we're getting in the car, we're going, right? You've had fun, you've been playing, right? You're on the porch out here, you're calling to your kids, hey kids, we're getting in the car, we're going. And your kid just stands down there on the slide and says, All right, all right. Yeah. It's a coup, right? They've all banded together. And they said, we'll see what happens if we all, right? So, but all right, so it's not as you imagine, but as you think about those occurrences, right? How does that make you feel? Now it's counseling time, right? Now you've made it a real event. I was trying to go hypothetical. Too close to home, right? What? All right, frustrated. All right, again, those are the things that we're looking at, because I think too often we're not looking at this from the God of the universe's perspective. I know that's weird to try to set, but that's what we did last week, right? When we're looking at them shooing this woman away, who's pouring out this lavish ointment upon Christ, and they're shooing her away and saying this would be better given to something else. Right? And to think about that from the perspective of Christ is like, what are you saying? Are you saying I'm not worthy of this? Are you saying I'm not worth this? And now here, right, when he makes a declaration and you got Peter saying, right? And he's thinking, man, do you still not get it? Do you still not understand? And so I do want us to, we're going to jump down to verse 66. And so in verse 66, again, a very long chapter, it says, as Peter was below in the courtyard, again, I don't want to try to walk through all the details of what's to come, because we'll look at those, looking at my time, we'll probably look at these next week. But understanding them in the meanwhile, from this declaration, right, they've gone to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is pouring out his heart to the Lord, sweating drops of blood there before the Lord. Judas leads this group in, chief priests and scribes, and they take Jesus captive, and they're already beginning these trials that night immediately. Then they said they're bringing all these false witnesses, and so that's some of the stuff we'll look at next week. So all that's happening, and they've already gotten to the point. Look at, I just want us to see this. And look at verse 65. Let's just go one verse earlier. Some began to spit at him, and to blindfold him, and to beat him with their fists, and to say to him, prophesy. And the officers received him with slaps in the face. And so what they're saying is they're blindfolding him, and they're hitting him in the face, and they're laughing and said, tell us who hit you. So that's happening. Right? That's happening. Right? And then verse 66. Right? So that's what's taking place. And then Peter, and what we need to keep in mind, it says as Peter was below in the courtyard, understand in this moving around that he's going to do and trying to adjust and hide himself, what we know from, and again, I intended to look it up this afternoon because I didn't have it for this morning. I don't know how many of you remember when the Passion came out. I'm starting to get older, right? So I want to say that was around, that's going to be around 2003, right? So about 20 years ago now, right? So 2003, yeah. Is that about right? And so there's one part, I mean, I'm watching it, and I was like, okay, you know, we dramatic license, whatever, and we're watching this, and then the one part I just was like, you know, why'd they do that? They didn't have to stretch that. Is when Peter denies the third time, and in the movie, I don't know if you remember, but in the movie, it's the third time Peter denies, Jesus looks at him. And I'm like, come on, right? We didn't have to add that for dramatic effect, but then when you go to the scripture, guess what, right? He's close enough, right? That in one of the gospel accounts, it says when that third denial happens, it says Jesus looks at him, right? And so he's close enough. Right, he's close enough to Jesus. When all this, well, at least at the third denial, right, you're going to see him kind of moving around because of the uncomfortable nature of the circumstance. But look at what it says in verse 60. As Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him. In Matthew, I believe it's going to tell us that he's warming himself around a fire. She looked at him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Nazarene." But he denied it, saying, "I don't know. I neither know nor understand what you're talking about. And so as the first denial, right, I just want us to see, I believe these are progressing. First denial is it's kind of a, right, I don't want to talk about it. Right? The first denial is, I don't even understand. Leave me alone. Right? This, yes, I'm denying, but it's, yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about. The second denial. He says, and he went out to the porch, right? So you see, that's what it meant. He's moving around. The servant girl saw him and began once more to say to the bystanders, so now she's getting other people involved, this is one of them. But again, he denied it. So now, what is he saying? I'm not one of them. So it goes from, I don't know what you're talking about, to I'm not one of them. And after a little while, the bystanders were again saying to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean too. But he began to curse and swear, I do not know this man you are talking about. Immediately, a rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had made the remark to him, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he began to weep. And so as we look at this to see, here he is in this, and really this pitiful state, right? That it tells us that they're scattered, and what we're going to see in this account in Mark's gospel, it says, I had a pastor in college. There's certain sermon titles maybe that you kind of latch onto, or things you remember. But he said he preached on the Easter streaker, right? If you're unfamiliar with the account, there's one of the disciples, many people believe or assume it's John, right? Where he was there, he's just wearing a linen cloak, and it says one of the guards grabbed him, and so he pulled a Joseph, right, and ditched the cloak and took off, right? And the scripture says very clearly that's all he had on, right? So you have the Easter streaker, right? So everybody's scattered, and yet here Peter is following from a distance. You're going to see John entering into this corridor with Jesus in the other Gospels. But getting to that point where he just is denying. So I want us to, like I said, we're trying to keep it with Mark, but I want us to think about this. I really wrestle with this question. Is, again, as Katie mentioned earlier, we know the end of the story, right? So we know Matthew's gospel is going to show Peter being restored. Right? There's going to be a period where after the resurrection, we're still not entirely sold on the fact that Peter is restored, right? Because he's seen Jesus. They're excited. They've seen the empty tomb. But yet, what does Peter do? He's like, I'm going fishing, right? And so it really leads into this idea of, all right, really, is that what we're going to do? We're just going to go back? We're going to go back to the old life? And that really seems to be the message that's being presented, because he takes the disciples with him. He's like, hey, guys, let's go. And so they all go and join with him. But it's there, at that moment, where Jesus restores him, right? You remember the 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And so the question then is, ultimately, I say ultimately, we could ask lots of questions, but did Peter's faith fail? Right? Because in Luke's account, he says prior to this, right, in the conversation where he says you all will fall away, he tells Peter, he says, Satan has demanded permission. Right now, I just love the way that's worded. He's demanded permission. Right? So understand, what does that mean? What does it mean to demand permission? Right? It means, hey, I demand you let me, please. Right? And so the phrase there is that he demanded permission. Some of your translations may simply say he desired. Right? Some of your translate his desire is for you. Right? What that simply means is I hold you. He wants you. Right? So even that term, I desire you, means he's longing for something he doesn't have, so he's coming and he's asking for that, right? And anybody remember what Jesus' response is after that? It's just the next phrase, I say response, where he says, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but what? Remember? But I am praying for you. Anybody just in that moment just be like, well, just say no. right? He's demanded permission. Could you just, right? But he says, I'm praying for you. But he says specifically, I'm praying, and this is why I asked the question. He's saying, I'm praying that your faith may not fail. Right? That's the specific prayer. I'm praying that your faith may not fail. But the very next thing he says, but when you have returned, strengthen the brothers. And so there's this thing, even in this prayer, so Satan's demanded to sift you like wheat. I'm praying for you that your faith may not fail, but the acknowledgement to say when you return, right? So if in just a few minutes I'd say, hey, everybody, I need you to return to your seats, what would you do? You'd look at me like, we're still sitting here, right? Right? How if I just right now say, hey, everybody, return to your seats, everybody would look, what is he talking about? We didn't go anywhere. So the only way to return is to have departed, right? And so there's at least some acknowledgement, even when Jesus says, I'm praying for you, an acknowledgement that I know you're going to depart. I know you're going to go. And so what is the failure? Is the failure the denial, or is the failure that he's not a failure because he ultimately comes back? And so again, I don't know if we can come up with an absolute definition for this, right? Right? We could go off on all sorts of theological tangents here, okay? But I just want us to understand that when it comes to the trials of life, when it comes to the things that we face, when it comes to the hardships, not the things that were brought on by our own sin, because I believe it's Peter who says that, man, let nobody suffer because you're a sinner. Like that's not what I'm talking about. If you're suffering because you went and stole something and now you're being punished, let no one suffer because he's a sinner. But if you suffer justly, if you suffer for my name's sake, right, you just understand you're blessed. Right? And so when we talk about the trials, I always want to make sure we distinguish. We're not talking about things that we brought upon ourselves. Right? We're not talking about the things, that I went and messed up. Now my all this is tough and this is hard. Why? Because of my sin. But sometimes walking in righteousness, right? Sometimes walking in righteousness will lead you to the most difficult of problems. Sometimes walking in righteousness will lead you right into the trial, right? I know I'm looking around the room and I know we can testify that sometimes, hey, listen, man, life was easy when I lived for the world. When I started walking with Jesus, things got tough. And so when we think about these trials, when we think about these things, understand that just all of this, and this so much of this, and I'm looking at my time, so much of this goes, and it would really wed well together with the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. So let me just jump to that real quick. Is understanding in that moment, right, where all of us would just be like, Jesus, just tell him no. Right? Just tell him no. And so let's look at that with Job, right? Let's just throw it to the Old Testament story of Job, the righteous sufferer. Job, the one who's standing before his friends and said, I did nothing wrong. I've made a covenant of everything. I give alms. You know me. I defend the widow and the orphan. I take care of my kids. I'm offering sacrifices every week just in case they messed up, right? And so all these things he's pointing out in his life, and yet in heaven, this assembly is going on, and God's saying to Satan, hey, have you considered Job? Let me say that again. It was God who said to Satan, Satan didn't knock on God's door and said, hey, can you give me permission to go after Job? Satan came into the presence of God, and God said, hey, Satan, look at my boy. Hey, Satan, have you considered Job? Look at him. He's walking in righteousness. And that's when Satan asked the question, will Job serve God for nothing? He says, you've blessed him. He's got, look at all, he's rich. He was rich. Understand when you go through the list of all the things that were taken from him, he was rich. He was rich in family. He was rich in livestock. He was rich in sheep. He was rich in land. He was rich in homes. I think every one of his kids had their own home. And so Satan says, well, if you take your blessings away, he says, he'll curse you. He'll curse you to your face. And in that moment, don't some of us wish Jesus or God would have just said, no, And yet, what we see in understanding to follow the Lord, if we marry this with James chapter 1, consider it all joy, my brethren. I don't say that flippantly. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that to you as you're walking through the storms of life. It's just like, hey, cheer up. But what the Bible teaches is that the things that we walk through have purpose. We don't always see the purpose. And I believe that it was even your prayer. They may not see the purpose in what they're walking through. But he says, consider all joy. Why? Knowing that the trials you walk through. What's that? Yeah. The testing of your faith produces endurance. Let endurance have its perfect result, that you might be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And so as we understand these things, and so that's why I said it marries well, and I'm just going to peek. I'm just going to step my toe into the Garden of Gethsemane because there's so much here. I got 4 minutes because my clock says I'm out of time. So if you look at the Garden of Gethsemane, he brings the three a little bit closer. Peter, James, and John says, hey, guys, you can come a little bit closer. I don't know that inner circle. And he says he goes and he falls to the ground. And understand he's about to go through the most horrific experience, right, that we can imagine. He's going to be mocked. He's going to be blindfolded. The God of the universe is going to be mocked. And he's going to, you understand, right? I'm just trying to think of any way to relate it to us, right? There's no way to relate it to us. I'm just trying to think if somebody came and started pushing you around and you had a gun, right? How many times are they going to push you before you pull the gun? And I know that's a horrific illustration, right? I'm going to get arrested, right? Preacher encourages violence. But what I'm saying is if you have a means out, if you have a means to be tougher than what's being put in front of you, how long are you going to take it for them to mock you and to push you? And understand, Jesus at his temptation, right? Where Satan says, hey, go, just throw yourself off of here and the angels will come and they'll gather you. Understand at any moment, right? The creator of the universe could have just looked at those guys and said, stop. And they wouldn't have been able to strike him. He could have done just as he had done previously. You remember, right? When they wanted to throw him off the hill, he just kind of walked through their midst. At any point, Jesus could have walked out of there. You understand that? And yet, what do we see? He knows he's about to experience all that. And what does his prayer begin with here? And I know we think, we jump to the, not my will, but your will be done. And I'm going to try to save that for next time. But as we look at the agony of this prayer, first it begins out, he cries out, Abba, Father, right? So he falls in a heap, and he's literally crying out, Daddy. I know we talked about our kids, right? As they defiantly give you the last night, right falling asleep. Right when we're falling asleep. Blood-curdling scream from the other side of the house. Mama, Mama, Mom, like panic, not fun, there's no laughter in this. It is complete horrific terror. Mama, Mama, Mama. Elliot, right? Laying in bed. Spider, right? Spider, he's on the bottom bunk, a little spider, right? Crawling across, but he's terrified. And I sorry you weren't there this morning, so I talk about you. I said, you just imagine a mom, right, in her sleep. What did she do? I mean, the covers, like I think, hit the wall, right? It's like the covers, and then she made a straight line. It was amazing through the house. She didn't even use the hall, right? And she just through the walls, straight line, shortest distance to get to my kid, right? Right? And so understand this prayer. That's how it begins, with Jesus falling in a heap and crying out, Daddy. And to understand what he is willingly going to go through in that moment, because what's the next thing he says? You can do anything, Dad. You could do anything. You have the power to do anything. Right? Could you take this? could you take this from me? But not what I want. Not what I want, but what you will. And so understand what's happening in that Garden of Gethsemane, right? This idea of you can do whatever, like as Peter has to be thinking, God, Jesus, you can do whatever. You can tell him no. And so I want us to understand what it looks like to be somebody who understands Jesus can do anything, God can do anything. And so when I look at my circumstance and I look at my situation, I understand that He's the God who can do anything, and yet still here I am, right? Still here I find myself in the trial, in the storm. And so we need to not miss and look back and to see it's Jesus who oftentimes is the one who put the disciples in the boat and said, hey guys, go to the other side. And what happens right in the middle of the lake, they run into a storm. And if you go and look at the way the words are used there, it says Jesus made His disciples get in the boat. He sent them straight into a storm. And so as we think about our lives, as we think about the trials and the storms and the rough times that we're going through, as we think about what does it look like to say, you know what, Jesus, I understand you can do anything. And I don't mean this to be crude, but this is the hand that you've dealt me. This is what you saw was going to test me, to make me whole, to make me complete, to make me hold fast to you. And so what we're going to look at, what we're going to see in Peter's life is we're going to see him fail. Right here, we're going to see him deny. I don't even know the man. I don't belong to them. And then we're just flip over to the book of Acts, where he's being beaten for Jesus. He's being beaten for Jesus, and he's going to walk out of that place as much strutting as he could do in Christ, right? And he's going to walk out of there, and what is he going to do? He's going to be excited. He's talking to his buddies. Do you believe we were considered worthy? We were considered worthy to be linked up with Jesus. We were considered worthy to suffer for Him. That means they looked at us and saw Him, and so that's why they beat us. And they walk out of there rejoicing. And so this guy, right? And so is Jesus using this? Is He walking through this to learn? I don't know. But it seems He did. It seems He did. It seems that something's going to be different next time he has opportunity to stand for the name of Christ, and he's going to. And so as we understand and we look and understand as his followers and his children, to understand in all of this, when we get to the cross, I really just want us to take our time and understand what great grace and mercy and compassion Christ poured out on us by enduring the cross. It says, for the shame set before him, right? Or and it says in Isaiah that, I know this is hard for us. It talks about God and Him crushing His own Son, right? And understand in these moments, right? We talked so much in the last months about the model of Christ, the teaching of Christ, the life He lived so that we could be encouraged to live. But all of that is paid for here. All of that's made possible here at the cross, and His willingness to go and to die for us. And so again, I hate that we'll dig back into this. I know not just sometimes it's better just let's get through the hard stuff. We're going to sink down into this Garden of Gethsemane again, beginning next week, and we'll look at the rest of this prayer, not my will but your will, and we'll go to His trial and get to the resurrection, the crucifixion and resurrection. Remember, we're in chapter 14, only 16 chapters in Mark, so we're right there at the end. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.